Hello, everybody. Welcome to Better Understandings of Science and our lecture series on technical communication, scientific and technical communication. My name is Richard Ward, and I'll be your instructor for this session. Today, we're going to be talking about teamwork and global considerations. By the end of this lecture, it is my hope that we will be able to manage a team project, participate in virtual teams and conduct face-to-face meetings, recognize and negotiate conflicts in collaborative groups, brainstorm using face-to-face and digital methods, review and edit the work of your peers, avoid unethical behavior as a team member, and understand how to work productively on a global team. So complex documents, things like long reports and proposals and manuals are rarely produced by just one person working alone. This is often a collaborative endeavor. Many people usually get together and create these documents. So traditionally, it was these teams are composed of people who come from one location within one business setting. But teams are increasingly distributed now across different job sites, time zones, and countries, especially in a time of the pandemic that we're dealing with now. More and more people are holding these meetings remotely. So whether the team's going to be on site or it's going to be distributed, members have got to find a way that they're going to be able to work together. So whether that team is on site or distributed, you have to find ways of expressing views persuasively, but you also have to be able to accept constructive criticism and be able to get along and reach agreements with everyone else, no matter what views they might hold. Teamwork's only going to be successful when there's a strong cooperation and trust going on, a recognized team structure, and clear communication. So some certain guidelines that you want to follow for managing some collaborative project. You want to make sure that you appoint a group manager. I have seen in the past where you have had more democratic groups who believe that they want to get together and no one's the leader. Unfortunately, I haven't had much luck with it, and so the group work that I have seen personally hasn't really benefited from that kind of structure. Group managers tend to give us one person that kind of gets everything together and makes everything happen. And not only that, but if there are issues that crop up, it's always easier to have one person to go to who can then disseminate that information. You also want to make sure that you define a clear and definite goal. What are you going to be trying to get to the bottom of within this meeting, within this project? What are you trying to do? You want to make sure that you are going to identify the type of document that you are going to require or that is required of you. Are you going to be working on a proposal? Are you working on a long report, a short report, a travel expense report? Make sure that you identify that specific topic that you are going to, or that document that you are going to be using. And then make sure that you try to divide the tasks up equally and look for people who have areas where they're situated in a more, a relatively stronger area. Put them in positions where they might flourish. However, it can be difficult to put somebody in an area that they may not excel at or they don't have a whole lot of information about, such as certain word programming software. That could be difficult for people who have relatively low knowledge of how those systems work and how those programs work, and they can struggle. It can create all kinds of tension within the group. You'll have other people who finish much more quickly with things while that person feels like they're doing the bulk lifting. So make sure that you disseminate, that you divide the tasks up equally as best you can. And I would recommend that you all get together with a group manager and everybody come to an agreement on who's doing what. And just because you're the group manager doesn't mean that you get to kind of like just walk around and supervise. Make sure that you're taking your fair share of whatever the tasks might be. You also want to make sure that you are establishing some sort of timetable. It's important to set yourself specific deadlines, whether they're soft or hard deadlines. You want to make sure that you are having some way that keeps everyone on track and going towards some potential end goal. Without an established timeline, things can typically go a little off the rails, where you've got people who may either, again, finish much more quickly than someone else, or you have projects that just run forever and ever and ever, stuck in one particular task or procedure that people can't seem to get nailed down. Sometimes it's good to have that deadline, that timetable to tell you, okay, we've spent this much time on this, now let's go with something. Okay. Sometimes that direction definitely helps. You also want to decide on a meeting schedule. Try to hammer out some details for when it's going to be acceptable for everybody to get together as a group. Not everyone is going to have the same time frame, and especially if you're going to be working on a global scale. Time zones can be infuriating. They can be stressful. They can be difficult to manage. So make sure that you're establishing something that everyone is available at a specific time to be able to get to where they need to. Another thing might be to host some sort of wiki or some sort of document online or a digital document that would allow you to communicate asynchronously. That is also potential. But if you're going to be doing this if you're going to be synchronously doing this, you want to make sure that you are synchronously doing this. You want to make sure that you are making a schedule that everyone can adhere to. You also want to establish a procedure for responding to the work of other members. Remember that when you're setting up this procedure is set in place so that you're not overly critical, and that perhaps you can give feedback that's going to be more constructive than destructive. So you want to establish procedures for responding to people. Perhaps say you want them to sit down, not say anything until everyone around you in the group has gone around and made a comment or whatever, and then that person has a certain amount of time to go and give feedback on why or what they did, what have you. And this ensures that the person who is having their work critiqued is listening. They're not trying to formulate reasoning and all this other stuff for what happened and where you went wrong or whatever, but they're jotting down notes or whatever, and they're just listening, okay? You also want to try to decide on the most suitable digital writing apps. How is this going to be happening? I mean, yes, you could be doing this in Google Documents. Google Drive actually has a really extensive software program that a lot of people adhere to, that a lot of people use. I know that we use it a lot in education. But Microsoft also has some great networking programs coming out now that also work well for being able to use for digital meetings. So make sure that you're deciding on what's going to be the most suitable. And not only that, some, especially with universities, like with what we work with, we have very specific writing apps and meeting apps that are specific to our group, and it almost posts like a message board. So define how you want to do this and how you want to go about it. You also want to try to, as a group, establish procedures for anything dealing with interpersonal problems that may crop up. Any issues that might happen. Figure out ways that you can take care of these things internally without going and seeking outside help. You want this to work as a well-oiled machine. You are going to have issues crop up where people aren't typically always getting along or whatever. But instead of taking that outside, try to handle that in-house. Try to handle that very internally as best you can. If all else fails, seek another supervisor outside of the group then to try to bring some kind of peace to whatever's going on. You also want to go and try to select a group decision-making style. You could go along with the whole project manager of do as I say kind of thing. I mean, that's one way of doing it. Um, but there's also, different kinds of ways that you can do voting in a democratic form, and still having that, that manager, that project manager who oversees everything. It is still very possible to hold, voting styles and the manager abstaining or contributing on the voting or whatever, only if there's need to be a tie break or whatever. Um, or you could just all vote in general. But you want to select some sort of group decision making style, something that's going to make people feel there is some sort of method to the madness, and not everyone is just off doing their own thing. Next, you want to decide how to evaluate each member's contribution. Again, you could go back to the ways that we would do critiques. Just have a way that everybody sits down and then they, start speaking to each other, not letting the person talk. But another way might be through user testing. You might all want to go and take up that person's contribution and user test it amongst yourselves, and then go and give feedback that way. That can be very beneficial. Another way that you might want to do that is also to go out and solicit user testers from the general public, or family members, people outside of your, outside of your group that would be willing to come in and contribute. You also want to try to prepare a project management plan, and this is going to go hand in hand with your timetable. Make sure that that plan is as detailed as you possibly can make it, and it's going to have specificities all the way down to software that you might be using, who's going to be working specifically on what project, for how long, what will they be using, who will be contributing. Iron out a good project management plan on how things are going to happen. And this is also going to be a place where you might want to factor in any kind of expenses, things that are going to have, that are going to cost the group any kind of money, lunches, equipment, office equipment, things of that nature. Also, if you're a project manager, it would behoove you to submit regular progress reports. Submitting these progress reports to your immediate supervisor outside of the group is one way, but there's also the submission of regular progress reports to clients. This could be beneficial to them, to let them know exactly where you are. And it's just something to let people know that you haven't forgotten, or that, it lets people know that there is work being done. So when it comes to virtual teamwork, you're going to have some technologies available for virtual meetings, and these are going to include things like email, blogs, conference calls, video conferencing, webinars, digital whiteboards, shared folders, and collaborative writing spaces, and project manager software. All of these things will go into helping you create these virtual meetings, especially during remote meetings. Email, it can be really, really good for keeping in touch in the distance. So can blogs. But conference calls and video conferencing and webinars, these are things that can actually, or group webinars that can actually, these things can go in and help specifically in real time. These are things that can help you distinguish what needs to be done in real time. And digital whiteboards are also a really good luxury. There are a lot of computer software system programs out there now that you can digitally use a whiteboard at your fingertips if need be. And shared folders, going back to like Google Drive and things like that, or if you have a very specific management software that you have with your company, it would probably behoove you to use that instead. So despite many digital tools for collaboration, face-to-face meetings are going to be a fact of life. They provide vital personal contact, and they are you get to see the gestures, you get to see the hand movement, you get to see the facial expressions, all of these things that go along with helping you to better communicate. Meetings are usually scheduled for two purposes. They are either to convey or exchange information, or to make decisions. Taking charge at a meeting doesn't mean that you're going in and imposing one's views or stifling opposing views. It does mean, however, moving the discussion along and keeping it centered on the issue at hand. So some certain guidelines that you might be able to use for face-to-face meetings are going to be, first, you want to set an agenda, okay? We want to cover specific things in a specific time within this meeting. Ask each person to prepare as needed. Bring note-taking material if they have some sort of presentations, or if they have anything that they want to bring along, make sure that it's brought. Also, make sure that if anyone is going to be needing to use overhead projectors or any kind of digital software, make sure that that stuff is set up and good to go. You also want to go in and begin by summarizing the minutes from your last meeting, kind of like as a reiteration of what happened before, so that people know, where you are, where you have come from, and everything else. And it gives members a chance to speak up on where they might be, considering all those things that they had going on. When it comes to the meeting itself and you start onto specific topics, make sure that you are sticking to the specific issues. Try to avoid digression. Try to avoid people going in and grandstanding and trying to use that time to kind of just waste time or whatever. That does happen. Keep people, and as the project manager, it would be good for you to do this. Keep people moving along the trajectory that needs to get the meeting moving, okay? Keep things moving. You also want to observe, guide, and listen, okay, as a project manager, and pretty much anyone else attending that meeting. Observe, guide, and listen. You want to make sure that you are listening rhetorically, that you're not just there thinking of reasons to blow someone's argument right out of the water. You want to listen intently, even if you have some issues that crop up. Jot them down, make notes, whatever you need to, okay? And then you want to summarize all the major points for that issue before calling a vote to it, okay? Make sure that you go over everything once more and let people know what they're going to be specifically voting for. And it's important that you always end the meeting on schedule, okay? People do not like it when a meeting runs beyond its scheduled time. People have things to do. They have work to do. They have kids to pick up from, soccer practice, whatever. In that meeting on schedule, when it needs to meet, and make sure that this is one of your, your strong points, your kind of like your rock, the thing that you all know you can rely on. This meeting is going to end when it ends, okay? Some different sources of conflict may crop up in collaborative groups, so even the most dynamic group settings can produce these conflicts just because of differences. And these differences can be things like interpersonal differences, where people might clash because of differences in personality, working style, commitment, standards, etc. There could be gender differences, and these can create perceptions of inequality. And then you have cultural differences. These are issues such as humor or ways of expressing politeness or cultural references that can cause misunderstandings. Understand that if you are surrounded by people not within your specific culture, and this doesn't have to be an international kind of thing. I mean, this could be a New Yorker in Georgia, per se, or for example, or a Detroit, Michigan person in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan can be a vast cultural difference. Make sure that all the people that are at that table may not understand your specific colloquialisms, your specific idioms, and your specific references and similes and metaphors. They're not going to understand all these things. So take into consideration who you're speaking to. Do a little bit of prep and finding out where people are from and whether or not they're going to understand what you're saying or take offense to it. So another, managing group conflict. You're not going to agree about everything. Before any group can reach any final agreement, you really need to make sure that you address any conflicts openly. Make sure you give everyone a chance to be heard. They need their say. There's nothing worse than being at a meeting and you never got your chance to chime in, to speak, or say your part, okay? And that person could be a representative of at least 2 or 3 other people within the meeting. Take everyone's feelings and opinions seriously. Don't just dismiss them out of pocket, okay? If they're bringing them up, there's a reason for it. Don't laugh. Don't belittle someone because of something that they've said. Don't be afraid to disagree. If you have an issue that crops up, make it heard. Be respectful. Be polite. But don't be afraid to bring that to people's attentions. Also, you want to make sure that you offer and accept constructive criticism. Okay, it's not just enough for you to go out and say, okay, here's what you could have done to make that better. All right, you also have to be open for people to do that to you as well. And it's going to take some thick skin. Remember that a lot of people in this meeting may not necessarily be friends per se. They may be people who are just co-workers or acquaintances. You also want to make sure that you find points of agreement with others who may hold different beliefs or different views. And this can help you in ways of finding some sort of compromise, some middle ground that you all may be able to get on. When a group makes a decision, it doesn't matter if you were against that decision. If the group makes the decision as a whole, you go in and you support it fully. You are with it. That's it. All right. You all had your vote. You all had your say. Everybody got to do what they had to do. It's not then time because all of a sudden they didn't want to follow your idea for you to go and mope in a corner and do some half-assed job or not do what you're supposed to be doing. You need to support it fully and you need to get behind your group. Okay. This is about the team, not about you. A lot of differences can be overcome just through active listening. Listening is a key to getting along, building relationships, and learning. Many of us seem more inclined to speak, to say what's on our minds than to listen. We often hope somebody else is going to be doing the listening for us, and that's just not the case. In fact, many of you should be, if this is at a meeting or if this is somewhere where you have a group setting, you should all be taking some notes, jotting things down. Effective listening is going to require some active involvement instead of just merely, this passive reception. It's not just about shaking your head, nodding your head or whatever. Effective listening is going to require involvement, okay? And sometimes that might mean restating what the person said back to them so that you have a full understanding of what was said. Don't dictate to people, okay? It's important that you are not just speaking. You need to make sure that you are being receptive, okay? Keep an open mind about anything that is being said. Be courteous to everyone around you. Do not start to don't start to insult people. Show genuine interest. Even if it's something that you disagree with, try your best to show some genuine interest in the subject matter. Always make sure that you're hearing the speaker out. Focus on that message, okay? Focus on what they're saying. Ask for clarification. Even if you don't necessarily understand, even if you understand it completely, you think you understand it completely, this is, again, that time to bring up a restatement of what they said to kind of like make sure you're on the right page, okay? And observe the 90-10 rule. And you can know more about the 90-10 rule in your textbooks. All right, the next thing you need to do is make sure that you're thinking creatively within these groups, okay? Use certain techniques to generate ideas, such as like brainstorming. Brainstorming is a great technique, and it produces as many ideas as possible from our own personal inventory. Follow the procedure of 1, choose a quiet setting and agree on a time limit. Right? 2, decide on a clear and specific goal for that session. Or 3, focus on the issue or problem. 4, as ideas begin to flow, record everyone. 5, if ideas are still flowing at session's end, keep going. Don't stop. 6, take a short break. 7, now confront your list and see what you have, okay? A lot of people will do brainstorming. Well, they'll even set a timer on their watch or whatever and just commence pencil to paper or fingers to keyboard and not give up until that timer is done. They are constantly typing or writing something. Another technique that you might be able to try could be mind mapping. All right, mind mapping helps members visualize relationships, and this is going to be structured as kind of like a web. They begin by drawing a circle around the main issue or concept, and then related ideas then are added, each in its own box as it's connected to that central circle by a ruled line or a branch. Okay, it all branches out. Storyboarding is also an effective tool for many of you who are going to be doing podcasts or video casts or any of this stuff. Make sure that you are, storyboarding can be very beneficial. It's a technique for visualizing the shape of the process from the ground up. In this case, group members are often going to write each idea they come across and sketch each visual on a large index card or some large sheet of paper. These cards or this paper is then displayed on a wall or a bulletin board so that others can come in, comment, or add, or delete, or refine, reshuffle the ideas, topics, and visuals, kind of like move things around. It's almost like this very interactive outline. It's an outline that can be shuffled around and moved at will. Now, when it comes to reviewing and editing others' work, documents produced collaboratively are often reviewed and edited extensively. Okay, reviewing just means that evaluating how well a document connects with its audience and meets its purpose in terms of accuracy, usefulness, organization, style, and design. Editing means actually fixing the piece. It's making it more precise and readable by rephrasing sentences, clarifying topic sentences, choosing better words or phrases, and fixing speller, grammar, syntax, and mechanical errors, all that good stuff. Some guidelines for peer reviewing and editing. You want to make sure that you read the entire piece at least twice before you make a comment, okay? Stopping in the early points of a piece or in the middle of a piece, you often may not get the bigger picture or the context behind what the person's saying. Wait till you get to the end. Read it a couple of times. Make sure that you understand what that person's trying to say. Also, remember that mere mechanical correctness doesn't guarantee effectiveness. Just because it is grammatically and syntactically perfect or whatever, it doesn't make it great. Okay, it doesn't make it effective. That person, and vice versa, just because it may not be grammatically perfect or syntactically perfect, it may still get the point across very well. It may do exactly what it's trying to do. It just needs a little bit of editing here and there. And understand the acceptable limits of editing. How far do you want to go into the editing? Keep in mind that the English language it's very flexible, right? There are many rules people think that are concrete that just aren't. Okay, everybody has heard about the old English rule of never split an infinitive. Okay, but if we never split the infinitive, we would never know to boldly go. Right? It would just sound weird if Gene Roddenberry came out and said to go boldly. Right? There is no real hard or fast rule about that. It is just something grammar purists came up with back in the day to try to say that this is the way normal or good citizens speak. And it's just not true. That there's nothing in the English language that says that has to be. Same way with ending sentences with a preposition. God, we see this one all over the place. How it is not good grammar to end a sentence with a preposition, which is absolute crap. Again, that comes from grammar purism. It is not any kind of rule or law within the English language. So keep that stuff in mind. However, there are some different things that you do need to know, certain things that are a part of grammar law, and these things might be don't begin a paragraph with an impersonal, with just some pronoun. Okay, make sure that you're going back specifically to the person that we're talking about. If it was John, make sure that you restate John in that first sentence of that first paragraph, so that we know exactly who you're talking about. Okay. Things happen between paragraphs. People can kind of drift. These are important things to remember. So understand the acceptable limits of editing. Also, make sure that when you're giving some feedback on editing, don't go through and pick that thing apart like it is just the worst thing you've ever seen. Don't go in and find 10, 15 things wrong. Find 2 or 3 things that you say may need correcting or whatever, or a better way of saying something, and let them have that. Okay, be done at that 2 or 3 times and be done. If they come back and say, try reading it again, give them 2 or 3 more then. But don't try to overload their plate at once, because that feels defeatist. It feels like they are done with what needs to be. It feels like they don't want to carry on, right? So make sure that you're honest with them, but you also want to be diplomatic. We all know those people out there who say, I don't care who it is, I tell the truth. I tell the truth in everything I do, and if it hurts somebody's feelings, oh well. That's just not the way to work, okay? Those are things that are said by people who don't have a lot of friends, and who probably never hold any kind of prestigious position, or they hold a position that allows them to be able to do those kinds of things. But as normal human beings, it's okay to be honest, but make sure that you're being diplomatic about it. If you come across something that doesn't work within the report, just say, hey, listen, I don't feel like this works, but I think this might be a better way to do it here. Give them some kind of an example that they might then lead from. Focus first on the big picture of whatever that document is. Focus on what they're trying to accomplish first and foremost. And you're going to get this. That's why we tell you to do 2 full read-throughs of any kind of document before you go back and start giving feedback. Focus on the big picture. Always explain why something doesn't work, okay? Don't just go in and say, this is stupid. Or don't go in and just say, this doesn't work. It's not enough. That's not good enough. Especially even if you're doing this digitally. Even if you're doing this as a Word document, and it's something that you are working on back to them, and you're putting little notations in the margins for them, make sure that you go into the margins and you tell them why certain things need to be changed. Explain it to them how these things don't. That way they can put that they can make that a part of their own internal repertoire. They can make that a part of their own internal syntax, grammar, whatever, or even just style. It can become a part of their style. So make sure that you are explaining why you don't feel like something's working. You also want to make specific recommendations for any kind of improvements, okay? Don't just say the whole thing stinks, right? Go in and say, hey, this particular line needs some improvement, and here's how you might be able to do that, okay? And also be aware that not all feedback has equal value, okay? Some people are going to focus in on some very, very trivial things that may not hold a lot of value, and that's fine. Just understand that people tend to do that, but not all feedback is going to be impactful. Even the feedback, talking about the feedback that you get within any kind of peer review. Okay, so when it comes to some ethical issues in the workplace and in workplace collaboration, especially when we're thinking about like our lean and downsized corporate world, it sends coworkers conflicting messages. It encourages teamwork often while also rewarding individuals. So the resulting mistrust may often promote like unethical behavior, such as intimidating one's peers, claiming credit for others' work, and hoarding information. So make sure that you understand that a lot of this stuff can come and form certain mistrust, and it's good for you to kind of like critically think it through on how to approach these certain things. Some global considerations. like in today's global environment, teams are often composed of people all over the world. And we've talked about this before. We've said this before briefly. Keep in mind that there are going to be some potential interpersonal issues. You're going to be missing certain social cues in virtual meetings, okay? When you are wrapped up in conference calls, for example. You're going to be missing the ways that certain people may be making gestures. You're going to have misunderstandings in certain cultural codes. And that's going to be, that could even be the tone of someone's voice, the clicking of a tongue. All of these things have certain cultural codes. In certain cultures, in certain Middle Eastern cultures, the sound actually means no. So it's very, very important to understand that the things that you do, the certain codes that you use, are going to carry certain weight. Also, be careful with misusing humor, slang, and idioms. Make sure that these folks understand, where you're coming from, and try not to be insensitive. In the United States, we have a lot of insensitive slang, idioms, and similes, especially. Make sure that you understand what you're doing before you do it. Is this the right place for this? I'm not telling you to make any of your stuff devoid of humor or slang or idioms. Sometimes that stuff really can spice up a document, or not a document so much as a global meeting or as a virtual meeting. It can sometimes make them a little bit more fun and less drab, especially if you're giving a speech or something like that. It's okay to use humor. It's okay to use slang, and it's okay to use certain idioms. Just make sure people get it and you're not stepping on toes. Do some homework. Also, misusing certain cultural specific references. And this could be some things that might have happened specifically within the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, or specifically within Dublin, Georgia. And someone from New York may not necessarily get pick up what you're laying down. So make sure that these folks are understanding those references before you use them, or just leave them out, okay? Failing to allow for easy translation. When you're speaking, speak clearly, and speak with some authority. Be careful when you're speaking, because a lot of this stuff is going to be transcribed. It's going to be translated by other people. And listen, a lot of times slang or idioms or similes or metaphors, these things do not translate like you think they do. Remember that certain things translate weirdly. Like even as simple as the word potato in English. In Persian, it's sib zemeni, which literally means ground apple. So keep in mind that these things don't always translate like we think they do. So make sure that you are allowing for an easy translation for others to be able to understand what you're saying. All right. Avoid, or always try to listen as best you can. Okay. Failing to listen can be one of the biggest issues you're going to run into. And if you're not listening, and I mean listening, not just listening and then waiting for your turn to speak. Listening, you have to listen to what's being said from that other person so that you can understand and get to the root of that issue. So some certain guidelines you might want to follow when you're communicating on a global team is you want to make sure that you're using the right technology for the situation. Is it going to be synchronous? Is it going to be asynchronous? You need to understand, is everyone familiar with Google Drive, or is everyone familiar with Microsoft Teamwork or Teams? Make sure that everyone is savvy in what's going on, okay? Remember that social cues are not conveyed well in a digital communication, and that you need to understand that. Consider how cultural codes might influence team dynamics, the ways that you carry yourself, the ways that you act around other individuals, not looking someone in the eye when they speak, or hanging your head down, or certain things like that. All of these things carry codes, carry little dynamics that you need to understand. Avoid humor, slang, idioms, and cultural references that may be interpreted incorrectly or some way you may not want it to be. Okay. Again, I'm not going to tell you to avoid humor, slang, and idioms because sometimes those things can liven up certain communications. But at the same time, you also want to make sure that you're not stepping on anyone's toes. And make sure that when you are communicating via either video conferencing, conference calls, or even if you're writing in Google Drive or some other way, or if you're any other form of writing, make sure that you are writing with translation in mind, that people will be able to go in and translate what is being said easily and efficiently. You also want to make sure that you are creating some kind of glossary so that everybody is using some identical vocabulary, okay? So that everybody's kind of on the same page with what needs to be said and done. You don't want people coming in and misconstruing something that was said. Always agree in advance on technical standards, things that you want to make sure that you are going to be implementing from the word go. Make sure that everybody is on the same page. Make sure you're being polite and professional. Okay, this is very important. Politeness and professionalism go a long, long way, especially when it comes to people making allowances for something that you may have misspoke. So politeness and professionalism cannot be overstated here. Be respectful of the rank and status of all the team members, even if they're the lowest person on the totem pole and you're the team leader, okay? Be respectful of every single person there. Don't go in like you are, the big boss and you go and make sure everything done the way you say it's going to be done. Be careful with that kind of stuff. Make sure you're an active listener, okay? This means not just listening for the sake of speaking back, but listening to understand. Also, show respect for differences by choosing your words carefully. Make sure you understand what you're saying and how you're going to say it. It might even behoove you to take what you're going to say, pass it in front of a couple of your peers, and say, what do you think about this? Have them go over and read it, and make sure that you're not saying anything that may ostracize or disrespect someone inadvertently. And make sure that you're using visual information carefully, okay? And this doesn't just mean brand and logos and things of that nature that may need blurring out or what have you. Use visual information carefully in that it is respectful, tasteful, especially if it's pictures and images. Make sure that it's tasteful and respectful and that you are being culturally sensitive about it, okay? Now, with that said, I'm going to bring to close this lecture on weighing ethical issues. Thank you all for attending this lecture. And we look forward to seeing you again at the next lecture. Thanks again and have a great one.